Hey, what's up, guys? It's Fly with Clayton, and thank you guys so much for tuning in today. A lot of you guys are probably wondering, what on earth is this video? So let me tell you, and why. Also, you're probably wondering why I haven't uploaded or continued my series that I was doing on training private pilots and stuff like that. Let me explain. So for the past couple months, I've been working on getting my Certified Flight Instructor License, or CFI, and I am right in the thick of it. So today is, I think, January 30th. My check ride is March 21st. So what better way to prepare myself than to train with you guys? So I gotta say that right off the bat, this is not training for you guys. Like, it's probably beneficial for people who want to watch and learn CFI stuff, but if you're just looking for something to straight up copy or like study in terms of preparing for your check ride, I'm also in that boat. I'm not a CFI, so this isn't training. This is more so me putting my training online so you guys can train with me, I guess you could say. So don't take this as face value. There might be mistakes, and I'm also obviously looking for critique and feedback from you guys. So let me know if there's something I missed. If you're a CFI and maybe I missed something or you have any recommendations or tips, be sure to let me know in the comments. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I'm going to just go through the PTS and a bunch of different stuff like that in a bunch of different videos. So today we'll start off with human behavior and effective communication, and then each other video will go from there and upload different ones. So let's get right into it. Just a quick little disclaimer, if you guys do want to follow along, I'm following along with the Backseat Pilots CFI lesson plans. I made some modifications to them, so if you want to follow along though, those are the lesson plans I'm following. Well, welcome everybody. I'm excited for you guys to be here. Today we're going to be talking about human behavior and effective communication. So before we jump in, I want to give you guys a little bit of backstory, a little fun little story to kick things off. When little baby Clayton was in 3rd grade, Clayton was a relatively good kid. He really didn't get himself into trouble. He was always obedient to the teacher, but there was one time that he actually did get in trouble. So what happened is baby Clayton did something. I don't remember what it was. It was something simple, like he didn't do his homework or didn't complete an assignment on time, something like that. And because he didn't complete his assignment on time, he was not allowed to participate in a classroom activity. And this classroom activity had the students going from different stations around the classroom and doing different activities. And little baby Clayton was forced to sit in his desk and watch as everyone else had a good time. So baby Clayton is sitting there, and for whatever reason, he grabs an eraser that's shaped like a little apple, like a little ball shape, and he just throws it across the floor. It goes bouncing, and it knocks into a tower that some students were building out of building blocks. And the tower comes crumbling down. It makes a loud crash. The whole class goes silent, and everyone, including the teacher, just stares right at baby Clayton. So, why do I tell you this? The reason why is because looking at this just story as plain as can be, we might just say baby Clayton was just a bad kid. But when we dig a little bit deeper, we can start to understand maybe why baby Clayton did this. Maybe he was upset that he didn't get to participate. Maybe he was acting out because he wanted attention. Understanding why he did what he did, his behavior, can effectively help us communicate with Clayton. Or in the case of the teacher, maybe the teacher wants to communicate with Clayton of why he did what he did. So that's why it's important for us to understand behavior so we can effectively communicate with other people. So let's just jump right in. We'll start off with the definition of human behavior. The FAA defines human behavior, or the study of human behavior, as an attempt to explain how and why humans function the way they do. So all humans function some way, and we want to try to figure out why they function the way they do. That's why we study human behavior. A scientific definition would be the product of factors that cause people to act in predictable ways. Again, when we can understand human behavior, we can understand why people are reacting the way they do. So human behavior is the result of attempts to satisfy certain needs. So all humans have needs that they need to fill. And so when we understand those needs and those needs are met, we can more effectively communicate with people. And we'll kind of dive more into that as we get more into the lesson. So humans grow, behavior changes. So this is why it's important as people mature, as kids mature into adults, their behavior is going to change. They're not going to act the same way as an adult as they did as a kid. So that's why it's important lesson plans and your lesson or your teaching style should adapt to different learners. A adult is going to respond differently to a 16-year-old kid. So it's important to understand where people are at in their age and maturity, and we can effectively communicate with them differently. So that's why it's important for instructors to build relationships with students. When you understand why a student is doing their flight training, why they're training or doing what they're doing, you can more effectively communicate with them because you know why they're doing what they're doing. Are they doing this because they just want to have fun, have their pilot's license and go fly for fun? Maybe they want a career and they want to go become a big shot airline pilot one day. Understanding that and what their motivation and their dreams are of why they want to do this more helps you communicate with them, and we'll get more into that as well. Learners tend to submit to authority as a valid means of control. So we as instructors, what controls are best for existing circumstances, for what students works better for others. So we want to create an atmosphere that enables and encourages learners to help project themselves forward towards those goals that I told you about. That's why it's important for us to build those relationships. When we understand why they're doing what they're doing, we can help motivate them and push them towards that goal. So let's talk about human needs and motivation. That motivation is important because understanding their goals, we can motivate them to go further. So let's talk about it. There's a cool little chart by this great guy named Maslov. It's called the hierarchy of needs. I'm going to try to put it on screen, maybe right here, or maybe I'll move my screen over, and we'll just go through it. It's a pyramid. So let's start with the bottom. The bottom part is the sociological. Sorry, I always feel like I'm dyslexic because sometimes I can't say words. But sociological. These are your basic elements of needs. So like food, water, and protection from the elements. So like, do you have a house over your head? Do you have food in your belly? Do you have water? These are just your basic needs, and that is very basic. If you're starving or if you haven't had water in days, you're not going to be able to talk or concentrate on anything until you've had food. So that's the bare basic. Let's start there. Go to the next one. Security. So this is protection against danger, threats, and deprivation can also affect a learner's behavior. So are you like being chased by someone? Is someone like actively out pursuing you? Is there any like threat or danger to you currently? Once you have that basic food and water, then your level of danger and threat, once that is met, we can go up to the next one, which is belonging. This is important for flight students because it can be very what's the word I'm looking for? Overwhelming, or I can't, the word is escaping me, but it can be overwhelming to come into a flight school and seeing intimidating. That's the word I was looking for. It can be intimidating to come into a flight school with 0 hours, 0 experience, and you see all these big shot pilots who have hundreds of hours of pilot's license, private instrument. It can be totally overwhelming and intimidating. So we want to create an atmosphere that's belonging to those students, make them feel like they actually belong at the school. That's why I love Greenville Aviation. That's where I'm training at, because it really feels like a family. Even though some students may be on different levels than where I'm at, I feel like I can communicate and relate with a lot of people there because we're all on the same level. By the way, I'm glancing over at my monitor here to make sure this recording doesn't stop. So if you see me glance over here, that's what that is. Esteem. So once we pass belonging, then our need of esteem needs to be filled. So if you have a positive self-esteem, then you're going to be more receptive to communication and being able to learn. There's an age-old saying, you are what you believe. If you believe you can become a pilot, then you will become a pilot. So we want to make sure we promote a positive atmosphere of self-esteem to help students believe in themselves. But that self-esteem, in terms of human needs and communications and motivations, can affect how they respond and communicate with us. And then finally, the last big one is self-actualization. Whenever you have filled all the rest, only then can self-actualization be attained. And this is basically, I was born to do this, and I willingly want to pursue further this skill or ability. And that is the highest level on the chart. But with all these human needs and motivations, we also have some defense mechanisms. These are some things that people kind of throw up, and they can kind of hinder, I guess you could say, human needs and communication. So the FAA actually lists out 8 different types of defense mechanisms. So let's just talk through them. The first one, repression. Repression means that humans tend to take thoughts in inaccessible areas and just push them down into their mind and kind of repress them. They don't want to think about them. So for example, if I took a student out and we went to go do stall training, and in the middle of that stall training, they accidentally throw that plane into a spin, and it terrifies everything about them. They're just terrified getting into that spin. Thankfully, we recover. My beautiful piloting skills save the day. But as I'm trying to explain to the student once and debrief what went wrong, they're not going to be able to focus on what I'm trying to teach them about stalls. All they're going to be thinking is, oh my gosh, that was terrifying. I'm just going to repress that down because of that stall or that spin. That's repression. Denial. That's another big one. This is just very simply refusing to accept reality because it's too threatening. Let's say a student comes in and they're going for a landing and they just plant that sucker onto the ground and kind of rattles them because it was such an abrupt landing. It like slams into the ground. And we're doing our debrief and I go, it was a little rough landing there. We got to make sure that we flare properly on landing. The student goes, no, well, that wasn't that bad. That was fine. Because they maybe were a little intimidated by the threat, how shocking or scary that landing could have been, they're denying the fact that they actually drilled the runway. That's denial. Compensation. Compensation is when you try to bring attention away from one mistake and maybe highlight something else. So for example, let's say a student is working in the pattern, we're working on touch and goes, and the student is just really struggling in the pattern. They can't maintain pattern altitude. They're banking too hard into their corners, just making all sorts of mistakes. And you're trying to debrief with them and trying to coach them through and give them some critique. And they're like, yeah, well, I might have not been able to hold my altitude very well, but you see those radio calls? Those radio calls were spot on. Yeah, that might be true, but that totally ignores what you were actually getting incorrect. So that's why it's important, that's what compensation is. They're highlighting something else that necessarily doesn't have to do with what they're, making the mistake on. Projection. Projection is this putting the blame on someone else. So I failed because I had a poor examiner. The learner believes that them failing wasn't their fault, when in reality, they probably just didn't study or didn't prepare very well. They project their blame onto someone else. Rationalization. Rationalization is you're just trying to justify your mistake. So another example of a student coming into land. Coming into land, same thing. They don't really flare properly, plant it a little bit hard, and they go, well, I got distracted because that tower controller was talking. Or another example was if they're studying for a test and they don't do very well, they said, I did well or bad on this test because I didn't have enough time to study. The learners skipped study groups and practice tests, whatever. There's just them rationalizing why they didn't do well or trying to justify it. Oh, excuse me. Reaction formation. This one is kind of interesting. I actually personally had a hard time understanding this, but the way my instructor described it is they kind of shield a behavior and they kind of lock onto something else, like they attach some type of reaction to a something happening. So it's developing conscious attitudes and behavior patterns that are just the opposite of what actually is happening. A fantasy. This one's pretty simple. I'll admit I'm very guilty of this one. Daydreaming about how things should be rather than where you currently are. There's no use in daydreaming about becoming a big shot airline pilot in ignoring what your instructor is trying to critique you on if you're a pre-solo student. So just just dreaming about what you want, where you want to be, and not where you're at. That's not focusing where you are at. Displacement. And the final one is just an unconscious shift of emotion, effect, or desire from the original object to a more acceptable, less threatening substitute. So worst case scenario, this is a very bad example, but say student does really bad and he goes home and he's taking it out on his wife, he's taking it out on his kids. He's displacing that frustration, anger, and putting it on someone who's less threatening, their wife, their kid. So those are some of the defense mechanisms that we just talked about. So let's talk about some learners' emotional reactions. So they can have some emotional reactions to different scenarios that they're in. Two of the most common, though, are anxiety and stress. So anxiety is the most significant psychological factor that affects flight instruction. And there's really, it's the way anxiety can kind of be countered is to reinforce the enjoyment of flying. So if a student's starting to show examples or exhibit some examples of anxiety, just reinforce why they're doing what they're doing, why they love to fly, and teach them to cope with their fear. You can talk and try to encourage students to not be afraid and just really encourage them through some of their fear to help them cope with it. A big one is this actually worked for me. When I first learned my steep turns, I was very caught off guard by steep turns, by how much you got pulled into the seat and how like sharp that bank is. So introduce maneuvers with care. You want to make sure they understand what to expect. Maybe like, hey, we're about to do a steep turn. This is going to be really sharp bank, and it's going to pull you into the seat. Just want to prepare you for what you're going to expect. So, impatience. An impatient learner fails to understand the need for preliminary training, and they seek only the ultimate objective. So to counteract this, we just want to make sure we're introducing things one step at a time. We don't want students to get focused on just the end goal. They need to stay on track and stay focused on what's at hand before they just rush ahead. So introduce things one step at a time with clearly state the goals and objectives of each step along the way. Where are your lack of interest? This kind of goes back to the anxiety thing. We just want to make sure that students aren't worried, and we just want to create and divert their attention away from worries and troubles to the task at hand. So really help them just focus in and try to pull them away from worry or lack of interest. Personally, I have not suffered from lack of interest because I love flying, and I guess you can also reinforce that with students, is reinforce that enjoyment of flying. Physical discomfort, illness, and fatigue, and dehydration. These are all big ones. If you're, we'll start with fatigue. Let's start with fatigue. There are two types of fatigue, acute and chronic. Acute fatigue is, this is the way I was told, and actually I'm going to steal this from Flight Mike Alpha. I love this description of it. Acute fatigue is I didn't sleep well last night. Chronic fatigue is I haven't slept well in months. So fatigue or acute fatigue is real short term, kind of more every day, and then chronic is more long term. And if you suffering from acute fatigue, that just requires just maybe a simple lifestyle change, getting some more exercise, just exercise is kind of the big thing, eating right, drinking water, and being healthy. Chronic fatigue is something that's really got to be diagnosed and handled by a professional, so maybe recommend a student to a professional psychiatrist or something like that. That's something that's kind of more out of the realm of the instructor being able to help the student with that. Dehydration and heat stroke. It's very important you drink a lot of water. When you get up in the air can also get a little bit drier. So it's very important just to make sure you drink plenty of water and not obviously be dehydrated in the air. It gets very hot here in South Carolina in the summer. So make sure you got plenty of water and maybe even have air vents open and stuff like that in the plane just to keep cool air flowing throughout the plane. Apathy due to inadequate instruction. We want to make sure that flight instruction or flight training is very, very expensive. You don't want a student to get frustrated because they're not getting very good instruction for the amount of money they're paying. So we should provide, as instructors, well-planned and appropriate and accurate instruction. We want to make sure that we seem prepared. We want to make sure that what we're teaching is meaningful, and we teach to that level of the learner. Like I said earlier, every learner's at a different level, and we don't want to teach down to someone or teach up to someone who is lost and confused. So we want to make sure we're providing an adequate level of instruction to them. We talked about stress, and there's going to be some different reactions to stress. Some abnormal reactions to stress might be completely absent or at least inadequate responses to stuff you're saying. They might be random or illogical. So they might be singing or humming while they're on landing or something like that. A student might be over cooperation, painstaking self-control, inappropriate laughter and singing. We talked about that. And just very rapid change of emotion. So maybe they even might have severe anger towards me or their instructor. If we do notice this as instructors, if it's very bad, to the point where it's very, very bad, we should refrain from instructing the learner, ensure they don't continue the training. So maybe recommend them to someone else, or just kind of talk with your chief instructor and be like, the student's really struggling with these bad reactions to stress, so maybe flight training is not for them. That's worst case scenario, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. But that's some negative responses or abnormal reactions to stress. All right, let's talk about some basic elements of communication. So in communication, there are three, I guess you could say, steps, three elements. There we go. Three elements of communication: the source, the symbols, and the receiver. So let's take this conversation we're having right now as an example. Right now, I am currently the source. I am the speaker, the sender, the transmitter. I am transmitting something, the symbol that we'll talk about in a second, to someone else. It's coming from me. So then my words, or I guess words, or in your case, this video, is the symbol. So I'm talking, you're hearing what I'm saying. You might be reading some visual things I'm putting on the screen. Those are the symbols of what I'm communicating to you. And then the receiver, you, the viewer, are the receiver. You are receiving all these symbols and interpreting them and and learning from them. And these interpreting and receiving this can lead to a change in behavior, your attitude, your experience. That is effectively how learning takes place. And we can talk about that. We'll talk about that later on in learning theory in another lesson. So with that, there might be some barriers to effective communication, things that kind of make it so communication doesn't fully pan out correctly, I guess you could say. There's a nice little acronym for it called COIL. So let's start and go through these. The first one, the C, is confusion between the symbol and the symbolized objects. So words for me could be very different for words for you. We all interpret symbols differently. So we want to make sure when we're communicating with someone that they are interpreting a symbol differently than what we're communicating to them. We want to make sure our associations are absolutely clear to someone. If they make sure they're understanding what the symbol I'm trying to convey. So that's C. Go to O. O stands for overuse of abstractions. And the example I like in this one is in flight training. Instead of saying, you were too high on that approach, or you were way too fast on that approach, be very precise. You were 200 feet too high on that approach. You were 10 knots too fast on that approach. Don't be abstract about it, too high, too low. Be concise and be direct. That way they have a more clear understanding of what you're trying to communicate. So that's CO, and then I stands for interference. So hopefully there's no interference going on right now, but say for example, I'm in the plane with you and you're my student and I'm trying to talk to you and teach you something, but the squelch is activated and all you can hear in your ears is just this loud sound. That's going to make it very hard for you to understand and hear what I'm saying. That's interference. If we were sitting here in this room and we were having a conversation and the lawn crew was outside just mowing away, that would also be interference. So interference just kind of, it disrupts whenever the source or the symbols are trying to be received by the receiver. And then finally, the L stands for lack of common experience. If I was trying to teach you about the lights on an aircraft and I said there's green on the right side, red on the left, and I go, you know how I'm boating, on the port side and starboard side, and you're just like, oh, I've never been boating in my life. Make sure there's a common experience between what you're trying to convey to the student or whoever you're talking to. It's the greatest single barrier in effective communication. Okay, so now that we've talked about some barriers of effective communication, let's talk about how we can develop our communication skills. So number one is role-playing. I'd honestly kind of consider this a version of role-playing. I'm talking to you and I'm practicing instructing you guys and teaching here on this video. So just kind of laying out examples and playing out scenarios, just role-playing. That's a great way to practice. Instructional communication. You want to make sure you know the topic well. Don't be afraid to use examples and past experiences. I've told a couple things here that have happened to me. Use those as teaching moments and use those to develop that communication. This is a huge one, listening. It's very easy to sit here and talk to somebody, but if you aren't listening to somebody at all, you're never going to hear from them and listen from their perspective and understand. Listen to understand rather to refute. Let me say that again. Listen to understand rather than refute. I feel like a lot of people online don't like this one, but when we listen to people and we understand, we can develop a better understanding of why they feel the way they do. I don't want to talk politics, but when we listen to other people debate and talk about things, even if we don't agree with them, maybe hearing their side of something helps us further cement why we believe the way we do. So it's always a great idea, no matter what the scenario is, to listen to other people, what they have to say, and develop a deeper understanding of what they're communicating. Questioning. That's a great way to make sure people understand, is just ask questions. Don't ask yes or no questions like, hey, do you understand? No, ask more open-ended questions that gives them a chance to talk. When students and learners can talk out and explain stuff, it helps them retain the information better, but also for you, it gives you a better idea if they actually understand what they're talking about. You just ask them, hey, do you understand this? And they just go, yep. How do you know for sure if they truly understand it? So ask open-ended questions. And then finally, instructional enhancement. As an instructor, we want to continue to deepen our knowledge of an area, and the better the instructor is at conveying it. So no matter, even after we're done instructing someone, or maybe we finish being instructors one day, we want to continue to further ourselves in knowledge and just practice conveying and teaching things more effectively. I've heard from other instructors it's not a bad idea every so often to go back through your lesson plans and refreshing yourself so you're just caught up and things are still fresh in your mind. So that brings us to the end of the lesson. So let's just kind of wrap through some of the stuff we talked about. We talked about the definitions of human behavior, the scientific and the FAA definition. We also talked about some human needs and motivations. We talked about some of those defense mechanisms that students might exhibit when trying to communicate with them. We also talked about a learner's reaction or emotional reactions, like with stress, anxiety, and all that kind of stuff. We talked about the basic elements of communications, those 3 elements. And then we talked about barriers of effective communication and what prevents that effective communication, our COIL acronym. And then finally, we talked about ways to develop our communication skills. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have questions or comments, be sure to leave them in the comments below. I want to make this a very helpful and learning atmosphere. But I hope you guys enjoyed these videos, and I'm going to try to continue these in the future and help you guys learn along with me as I prepare for my Certified Flight Instructor Checkride. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys would like to see more of these, be sure, my phone just vibrated. If you guys would like to see more of these, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button, and we'll continue to do more of these in the future. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.